This comment says, interesting. Training sits and look at me in aggressive reactivity has been really effective to hard stop bad interactions for my dog. How are you training that immediate disengage instead? And this comment was left on a video where I talk about one of the major pitfalls in behavior cases being asking for behaviors. And I really love this question. It gives me an opportunity to really elaborate on what we do in these situations. I think the first thing I would do is reframe the goal. So my goal is not necessarily to train the dog to disengage from the trigger. Pretty much regardless of the type of dysregulation you're working with, whether it's separation anxiety or fear-based aggression, we have sort of three overarching goals: to reduce the physiological stress response to the trigger, to increase resilience to stress, and to increase the ability to self-regulate. If you think of a stress scale, green, yellow, orange, red, and you think about the behavior that lines up with each of those categories. In the red, we are, let's say, seeing our fight response there, right? The dog is reacting. They're lunging, barking, growling, biting, fighting. Or maybe they're freaking out, they're panicking, they're flighting, they're saying, like, get me out of here, let's go home, pulling on the leash, trying to escape. Or of course we could be seeing fawn, fidget, or freeze. But if you scale that down a little, and now you're in the orange zone, maybe now you are seeing a really tense body, hard staring, flagging tail. If you lower the scale a bit more and you end up in yellow, now you're going to see avoidance behaviors, displacement behaviors. If you keep going down to green, you're going to start to see curiosity and pro-social behaviors. So my goal is to increase the dog's window of tolerance around that trigger so that they are existing in a space of curiosity or a space of being able to cope with the trigger, that green space, that yellow space. Teaching the dog to sit and teaching the dog to look at me does not accomplish that. It might train an alternative behavior, but it's not going to facilitate curiosity. In fact, it actually works against what I'm trying to do. Because if my dog is looking at me, then they can't be looking at the trigger and gathering information about their safety. And if they're sitting, they can't engage in flight and take more space when they're worried. So what I might do instead is, usually one of the first things is to teach a flight cue. And that can be something as simple as saying, Fluffy, let's go, and taking off in another direction. And then I do a scatter feed or some other calming activity at the end to help bring that arousal down, because running is going to bring them further up. And in practice, with no triggers around, we can play this as an on-off switch game. We can practice this with specific routes, so like from the side of the fence to the back door. And then we can use it in real life situations as part of our management. And we can use it in training setups. If the dog gets a little bit too close and they're in like that yellow zone, they're starting to show signs of discomfort. Part of it is teaching the humans to recognize the sign that the dog is trying to get more space, which may be displacement behaviors, avoidance, things like that in the yellow, or certainly signs that they're higher on the scale. Or it could be slowing down to notice the dog hesitating or stutter stopping or trying to create space in that way. Now the dog has a way to move away, and so when dogs perceive that they can flight, they will flight over fight. Perception is really, really key there. And if you have a strong learning history of fight working to keep you safe, you may not perceive flight as an option. But so we're showing them that flight is an option. And we're helping them get it even if they can't get it on their own, like when they're on a leash. And so we're increasing their agency in that situation. I might use strategies like treat retreat, or like bat setups, depending on what our goals are and what triggers we're working with. I might use counter conditioning and desensitization, which involves allowing the dog to observe the trigger, and not asking them to hold still or asking them to look at me and avoid the big scary thing off over here. I might break the trigger down into smaller pieces. If we have fear-based reactivity towards other dogs, I might work on noise desensitization to dog sounds. One of the ways that I set my clients up for counter conditioning within a pattern is through engage, disengage, which some people think of as an operant exercise, but I do not. There is a big difference, in my opinion, and in my experience, with saying yes, using a marker when the dog perceives the trigger, and cueing a behavior, or even saying their name. When we cue the behavior or say their name, the dog is going to wait for that cue, often, to perform that behavior. When we mark yes, we associate what the dog is looking at or perceiving or thinking about at that time with something positive, because yes means treat. And we are indirectly prompting disengagement. I find that it works very, very differently than cueing like a look at me, or again, even saying the dog's name. And my focus in that type of setup is never eye contact. It's never even orienting towards me. I'm fine with them just orienting towards the treat, because I'm really focused on creating a pattern and counter conditioning. And we may use treat placement in that scenario to encourage the dog to lower their head beneath their body, to sniff, to seek, and to engage with the environment. This is not about this the commenter directly, but look at me and sit are actually probably my two of my least favorite cues for these scenarios, probably up there with leave it. And the reasons are not just because, from an operant perspective, the reasons I mentioned in the other video, that it's taking a bunch of the dog's spoons that they should be spending elsewhere, because it's reducing agency in a way that we don't need to, because it's masking our data. But also, when a dog is afraid of something and we are asking them to perceive and encounter and observe that scary thing, asking them to hold still is unfair. They need to be able to move their body. They need to be able to self-soothe, self-regulate. They might want to do a thinking circle. They might want to start sniffing. They might want to take additional space. If they're high enough on the stress scale, they're adrenalized, and now they're fighting against what their body is telling them to do, to move away, which is really, really damaging. Look at me is similarly frustrating to me, because I am going to have a really hard time as that dog if I am scared of something, ignoring it. If I'm really scared of something over here and my friend was like, just look at me, just stare at me, just keep looking at me over here, don't look at that scary thing, that wouldn't make a ton of sense, right? I need to gather information. I need to figure out if I'm safe and how to get myself safer. And hopefully I'm in a stage where I can begin displaying some curiosity. Operant behaviors aren't going to get us emotional change. And they're not going to put the human in a position where they can ever walk back their management, right? And say, all right, like now my dog can disengage back to the environment and take space on his own. Instead, it's going to be a constant waiting to be told to sit and look. And even if the dog does start to sit and look on their own, we haven't necessarily taught them something that's going to reduce their stress levels, increase their resilience. And we haven't really taught them a self-regulatory habit in any way that's going to impact their stress levels, in the same way that lowering the head below the body lowers the heart rate, or sniffing or licking or chewing or drinking water or grabbing a toy or those sorts of things can release endorphins and in other ways affect where they fall on that stress scale. I actually have a whole blog post about why I don't tell my dog to sit. So those are my thoughts.